The city lights twinkled below, a dazzling tapestry of ambition and endless possibility. Yet from his penthouse office, Alexander Sterling, a titan of industry and a man of colossal wealth, saw only an abyss of agonizing pain. His world, meticulously built on power and billions, was a gilded cage, luxurious yet suffocating, defined by a singular, unyielding sorrow, his beloved daughter, Lily. Lily, his only child, his greatest treasure, was crippled by a rare, untreatable spinal condition. It had stolen her mobility, confined her to a wheelchair, and slowly, mercilessly, chipped away at her vibrant spirit. Alexander, with his boundless resources, had spared no expense. He had flown Lily to every corner of the globe, consulted with every renowned specialist, and poured millions into experimental treatments. Each new doctor offered a flicker of hope, only to extinguish it with the stark reality of Lily's prognosis. He had endured the crushing weight of countless futile therapies, watching his daughter endure endless pain with a quiet, heartbreaking resilience that only deepened his own despair. He was a man accustomed to conquering obstacles, to bending the world to his will. But this was an enemy he could not defeat, a battle his money could not win. The relentless pursuit of a cure had left him desperate and cynical, a shadow of the once dynamic entrepreneur. His vast fortune, once a source of pride, now felt like a cruel mockery, utterly useless against the suffering of his child. The city, usually a symphony of bustling activity, felt muted, its sounds muffled by the thick glass of his office. He sat alone, staring at a framed photograph of Lily, her smile fragile but brave, her eyes filled with a longing he couldn't fulfill. He was a man who had everything, yet he possessed nothing that truly mattered. One evening, after enduring another agonizing charity gala, a necessary evil for maintaining his public image, but a hollow spectacle of forced smiles and empty platitudes, Alexander stepped out into the crisp night air. His black limousine idled silently, waiting to whisk him away from the pretense. His thoughts were consumed by Lily, by the latest, most devastating prognosis from a leading neurologist. "There's nothing more we can do, Mr. Sterling. It's progressive. Prepare for her quality of life to deteriorate." As he walked towards his car, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the alleyway beside the venue. It was a boy, no older than 15, perhaps 16. His clothes were ragged, worn, and his hair was matted with grime. He was clearly a beggar boy, a stark contrast to the opulent world Alexander inhabited. Most people would have dismissed him, perhaps offered a coin out of pity, or simply ignored him. But this boy was different. He didn't hold out a hand for money. Instead, his eyes, sharp and piercing despite his youthful face, locked onto Alexander's. There was an unnerving intensity in their gaze, a wisdom that seemed to transcend his age and circumstances. "Mr. Sterling." The boy's voice was rough, unpolished, yet clear and surprisingly confident. Alexander paused, irritation flickering. He rarely engaged with the homeless, preferring his security to handle such encounters. "Yes," he replied, his tone clipped, dismissive. The boy took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I know about your daughter, Lily." Alexander froze. His entire body tensed. How did this street urchin know about Lily? He was a meticulous man. His daughter's condition was a closely guarded family secret, shielded from the ravenous tabloids. His security detail, always vigilant, moved instinctively, ready to intervene. But the boy raised a hand, a gesture of unexpected calm. "Don't worry. I mean no harm. I know you've tried everything. The doctors, the treatments, the millions. But they're wrong. They don't understand." Alexander scoffed, a cynical laugh escaping his lips. "And you do a street boy claims to know more than the world's leading specialists." The boy's eyes, however, held a profound conviction that pricked at Alexander's cynicism. "I can make her walk again," the boy stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, cutting through the night air like a blade. I can make your crippled daughter walk again." Alexander, about to dismiss the boy as a deluded charlatan, stopped dead in his tracks. His cynicism, his desperation, collided in a moment of disorienting shock. He had heard every promise, seen every failed attempt. Yet, the boy's unwavering gaze, his impossible claim, rooted Alexander to the spot. A tiny, irrational flicker of hope, a desperate tendril in the wasteland of his despair, began to stir. He spun around, his eyes fixed on the boy, his mind racing. The millionaire turned around and froze. The impossible claim, uttered by a mere beggar boy, had shattered his carefully constructed world of hopelessness, leaving him suspended between utter disbelief and a desperate, illogical yearning for a miracle. Alexander Sterling stood frozen, the boy's impossible claim echoing in the crisp night air. His security detail, trained to anticipate his every command, hovered nearby, awaiting his signal to dismiss the audacious beggar. But Alexander remained still, his gaze locked on the young, ragged figure. The boy, Ethan, met his intense stare with a piercing gaze that seemed to probe the depths of Alexander's cynical soul. There was no guile in his eyes, no hint of a scam artist, only a quiet, unnerving certainty. Unnerving. "You're a charlatan," Alexander finally scoffed, his voice laced with the weariness of a man who had heard countless false promises. "I've dealt with the best doctors, the most advanced clinics. What could a boy like you possibly know?" Ethan didn't flinch. "They treat the body, Mr. Sterling. They don't understand the energy that binds it. Lily's condition isn't just about bones and nerves. It's about a blockage, a disruption in the flow." His words were strange, almost mystical, yet delivered with a grounded conviction that disarmed Alexander. A blockage. Alexander scoffed again, though a sliver of intrigue, against his better judgment, began to sprout. "What exactly do you propose?" Ethan took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "There's an ancient healing method, passed down through generations. It's not in your medical books, Mr. Sterling. It uses herbs, touch, and a connection to the body's natural rhythms. It can reawaken what's dormant." Alexander's mind raced. He had exhausted every conventional avenue. Every logical solution had failed. His desperation was a gaping wound, leaving him vulnerable to even the most outlandish propositions. But the boy's specific mention of Lily's obscure condition, its deep-seated nature, was unsettling. How could he know so much about a rare diagnosis that few specialists fully grasped? "How do you know about Lily?" Alexander demanded, his voice sharp. "Her condition is a private matter." Ethan hesitated. His gaze flickered, a momentary shadow crossing his face. I've seen her at the hospital. Sometimes. I see many people. I know things." His evasiveness was a red flag, yet his unwavering conviction, the sheer audacity of his claim, tugged at Alexander's frayed nerves. He had nothing left to lose. What was one more futile attempt, compared to the crushing weight of Lily's suffering? "All right," Alexander said, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. He was aware of the absurdity of the situation. A billionaire, a man of science and logic, considering the words of a street boy. "Come with me. But understand this: if this is a trick, if you cause any harm, you will regret it. My security will be watching your every move." Ethan nodded, his eyes bright. "I understand. I just ask for a chance for Lily." Alexander, against all rational judgment, found himself agreeing to bring Ethan to his lavish estate. The very idea was preposterous. His mansion, a fortress of opulence and security, would now host a ragged street boy claiming to possess ancient healing secrets. His head of security, a stern ex-military man named Reynolds, raised an eyebrow, a silent question in his gaze, but Alexander merely waved him off. The drive to the estate was surreal. Ethan sat quietly in the plush leather seats of the limousine, gazing out at the city lights with a calm detachment that surprised Alexander. He didn't gawk at the luxury, didn't ask for anything. He simply was. Upon arrival, Ethan was subjected to a thorough but discreet security check. He surrendered his few meager possessions, including a small pouch filled with dried herbs and a curious, smooth stone. Alexander ordered him to be given clean clothes and a warm meal, all under strict supervision. He was to be housed in a guest wing, separate from Lily's private quarters, and watched around the clock. The next morning, Alexander led Ethan into Lily's sun-drenched room. Lily, pale and fragile, sat in her motorized wheelchair. Her eyes, usually filled with a quiet sadness, widened with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension at the sight of the unusual visitor. She had grown accustomed to a revolving door of doctors, each one bringing new hope that inevitably faded. "Lily, this is Ethan," Alexander said, his voice strained with a mixture of hope and deep skepticism. "He believes he can help you." Ethan offered Lily a small, gentle smile, his eyes surprisingly warm. He didn't speak with grand pronouncements. He simply knelt beside her wheelchair, his eyes studying her with an intensity that seemed to see beyond her physical limitations. He took her hand, his touch surprisingly soft, and closed his eyes. Alexander watched, his arms crossed, his face a mask of doubt. This was it. His last, desperate gamble. He expected nothing, yet a tiny, illogical part of him clung to the whispers of the unconventional, the slim, fragile hope that this street boy, this enigma, might possess a knowledge that his millions, and the world's leading medical minds, had failed to grasp. The game was on, and Alexander Sterling, the ruthless billionaire, was about to step into a realm beyond logic, where ancient secrets might just hold the key to his daughter's shattered dream. The opulent silence of Alexander Sterling's mansion, usually a comfort, now felt charged with a strange tension. Ethan, the beggar boy turned unconventional healer, moved with a quiet grace around Lily's sunlit room. His presence, so out of place amidst the polished surfaces and antique furniture, somehow brought a raw, earthy energy to the sterile environment. Alexander watched his every move, a hawk observing its prey, his skepticism warring with a desperate, fragile hope. Ethan didn't use needles or machines. Instead, he employed a series of gentle, rhythmic touches along Lily's spine, his hands moving with an intuitive understanding that baffled the medical team Alexander had assembled. He applied strange herbal concoctions, their earthy scent filling the room, contrasting sharply with the antiseptic smell of the hospital wing. He spoke to Lily in soft, encouraging tones, guiding her through gentle stretches and breathing exercises. Lily, usually wary of new treatments and the procession of disappointed doctors, responded to Ethan with an unexpected openness. Her initial hesitation faded, replaced by a quiet trust in his gentle hands and piercing, earnest gaze. Alexander observed the interactions from a discreet distance, a part of him still convinced this was an elaborate hoax. Yet, he couldn't deny the subtle changes he witnessed. Lily's facial muscles, often taut with pain, seemed to relax under Ethan's touch. A faint color returned to her cheeks, and her eyes, once dull with resignation, held a new, hopeful glint. He saw her attempt a small, almost imperceptible movement in her toes, a flicker of sensation that years of therapy had failed to achieve. One afternoon, as Ethan was performing a series of gentle stretches on Lily's legs, his sleeve rode up, revealing a small, faded scar on his left wrist. It was a distinctive scar, a jagged, almost star-shaped mark that seemed to have been caused by a burn. Alexander's breath hitched. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, coursed through him, a lightning strike through the carefully constructed walls of his forgotten past. He remembered that scar, vaguely, from a long-buried memory. a dark corner of his mind he had sealed off decades ago. The memory was fleeting, fragmented, like a nightmare recalled in waking hours. A sense of unease, cold and unsettling, began to spread through him. Later that evening, after Ethan had finished his session with Lily and was being escorted back to his guest wing by security, Alexander found himself alone in his study, the memory of the scar haunting him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but his hand trembled. He walked to a hidden drawer in his mahogany desk, a place he rarely opened, a repository of remnants from a life he had tried to erase. He pulled out an old, dusty photo album, its leather cracked with age. Flipping through the pages, he saw pictures of a younger, more carefree Alexander, a time before the burdens of his empire had fully settled upon him. He paused at a section, his fingers tracing faded images. There, a photograph of a young boy, no older than 8, with a shy smile and bright, intelligent eyes. He was standing beside a younger version of Alexander, both dressed in loose-fitting hospital gowns, and on the boy's left wrist, clearly visible despite the blurriness of the old photograph, was the very same star-shaped scar. The boy in the photo was unmistakably Ethan. His features, though younger, were identical: the piercing gaze, the slight curve of his smile, the shock of dark hair. The realization slammed into Alexander with the force of a physical blow. A flood of suppressed memories, a torrent of guilt and pain, burst forth, overwhelming his senses. It was a past etched in pain, a hidden chapter of his life he had desperately tried to bury. The boy in the photograph was not just a fellow patient from a distant past. He was his son, his long-lost son. The memories came rushing back, disjointed at first, then forming a horrifyingly coherent narrative, a secret, illegal experimental clinic, funded by his desperate parents to treat Alexander's own childhood injury, a temporary paralysis from a riding accident that had left him crippled for a brief, terrifying period. He had been treated there, far from public scrutiny, desperate for a cure that would restore his ability to walk and, more importantly, secure his inheritance. He remembered the other patients, the hushed secrecy, the unconventional treatments. He remembered the young, bright-eyed boy who had shared a room with him for a short time, a boy who had also suffered from a form of paralysis, and who had received a terrible burn on his wrist during a chaotic, terrifying fire that had erupted in one of the clinic's labs. He remembered the panic, the screams, the frantic evacuation. His parents, obsessed with protecting their family's reputation and his fragile recovery, had whisked him away from the burning clinic, away from the chaos, away from the young boy. They had told him the clinic was destroyed, that all its records were lost, and that the boy had perished in the fire. They had silenced any questions, ensuring that this dark chapter of their family's history remained buried. The horrifying realization solidified Ethan. The beggar boy, the unconventional healer, was his son. The boy he had believed dead, the one he had deliberately forgotten, had not only survived the fire, but had carried its mark, a silent testament to a shared past. And now, by a cruel twist of fate, he was here, in Alexander's home, unknowingly healing his own sister. The room began to spin. The whiskey glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished floor. The fragments of glass mirrored the shards of Alexander's carefully constructed world. His cynicism, his carefully cultivated detachment, crumbled to dust. The burden of guilt, long suppressed, now crushed him with suffocating force. He had sent his daughter Lily around the world seeking a cure, while his own son, the true healer, had been a beggar on the streets, the victim of a forgotten tragedy he had actively helped to conceal. The truth, finally unveiled, was a pain far more crippling than any physical ailment. The shattered whiskey glass on the marble floor was a fitting metaphor for Alexander Sterling's world. The sight of the scar on Ethan's wrist had not merely triggered a memory, it had detonated a dormant bomb of guilt and buried trauma, unleashing a torrent of fragmented images that now coalesced into a horrifyingly coherent narrative. The silence of his opulent study was filled with the echoes of a forgotten fire. He sank into his leather chair, the weight of the past pressing down on him. The fire. The clinic. The boy. It had been decades ago, when Alexander was a young, ambitious man in his late teens. He had been a talented athlete, a promising prodigy, until a devastating riding accident left him with severe spinal injuries, temporarily paralyzing his legs. His parents, fiercely protective of their family's image and their son's future inheritance, had been frantic. They wanted a quick, discreet cure, something beyond the public eye of conventional medicine. That's when they founded a clandestine, experimental clinic nestled in a remote, secluded area. It operated under a veil of extreme secrecy, offering unconventional treatments to wealthy, desperate families who sought miracles outside the established medical system. Alexander remembered the hushed atmosphere, the strange, almost mystical remedies, and the chilling warnings from his parents about never speaking of the place. They were obsessed with his recovery, not just for his health, but for the purity of their lineage and his unblemished path to inheriting the family empire. He remembered the early days at the clinic, a blur of painful therapies and isolated recovery. Then, he met another patient, a boy, no older than 8, perhaps 9. He had a brilliant, curious mind and surprisingly bright eyes, even in the dim light of the clinic. The boy, whose name Alexander now recalled with a sickening jolt, Ethan. Ethan had suffered from a similar form of paralysis, a rare congenital condition that had left him unable to walk since birth. He was an orphan, or so Alexander had been told, brought to the clinic by distant, wealthy relatives who were equally desperate for a cure. They had been temporary roommates in a small, Spartan room, away from the prying eyes of the main facility. Alexander, consumed by his own pain and fear, had paid little attention to the younger boy, his focus solely on his own recovery. Yet, he vaguely recalled the boy's quiet strength, his uncomplaining nature, and a curious, innate understanding of the human body that belied his age. He remembered seeing Ethan tinkering with strange contraptions, whispering to the plants in the clinic's small garden. And he remembered the star-shaped burn scar on Ethan's wrist, an injury the boy had sustained in a minor laboratory mishap. Then came the night of the fire, a chaotic, terrifying blaze that erupted suddenly in one of the clinic's experimental labs. The alarms blared, people screamed, and the smell of smoke filled the air. Panic had erupted. Alexander, still recovering but able to move with crutches, was quickly grabbed by his frantic parents, who were already prepared for an emergency evacuation. They had shielded him, hurried him away, their only concern his safety and the absolute need to maintain secrecy about the clinic. He remembered glancing back, seeing a flash of fire, and hearing the distant screams of others caught in the inferno. He had a fleeting glimpse of Ethan, small and seemingly disoriented amidst the smoke and chaos, near the burning lab. His parents, resolute in their mission to protect their reputation, had told him that the clinic was completely destroyed, all records obliterated, and that anyone left inside had perished. They had made it clear this chapter of his life was to be sealed, forgotten, a secret never to be spoken of. His recovery, his inheritance, his future, they were paramount. Any questions about the boy, or the clinic's true nature, were swiftly shut down. Alexander had believed them. He had wanted to believe them. He had submerged himself in his recovery, then in his studies, and finally in the relentless pursuit of wealth and power, building his empire brick by brick, each success a further nail in the coffin of that buried memory. He had rationalized his parents' actions, convinced himself that he had been lucky to escape, that looking back would only hinder his progress. The guilt, when it surfaced, was quickly suppressed, drowned in work and the promise of more wealth. But now, the sight of that scar on Ethan's wrist, decades later, had shattered the carefully constructed facade. The beggar boy, the unconventional healer, was not just a stranger with an uncanny ability. He was Ethan, the boy from the clinic, his son, the profound, horrifying realization dawned on him. His parents, in their ruthless pursuit of protecting his future, had not only allowed him to believe his son had died in a fire, but had actively conspired to ensure that secret remained buried. The implications were staggering. His own temporary paralysis as a child, Ethan's congenital condition, the illegal clinic, the fire, the deliberately hidden existence of his son. It was a complex, horrific tapestry woven from ambition, fear, and a callous disregard for human life. Alexander Sterling, the man who prided himself on his control and his foresight, had been a pawn in his own family's deception, a victim of his own parents' ruthlessness. The realization twisted his gut, a fresh, agonizing pain that eclipsed even his despair over Lily. He had spent millions, scoured the globe, searching for a cure for Lily, when the very miracle he sought, his own son, had been living in poverty, a survivor of a tragedy he had helped to erase. The echoes of a forgotten fire now burned within him, a consuming inferno of guilt, regret, and a desperate, agonizing need to understand the full extent of the truth, and to somehow, impossibly, atone. The shattered remnants of Alexander Sterling's past lay exposed, raw and agonizing. The realization that Ethan, the beggar boy, was his son, a survivor of a fire he believed had claimed him, was a truth that eclipsed all others. But the lingering question, a venomous whisper in his mind, was how had his parents managed to convince him of Ethan's death so completely? And how had Ethan, his own flesh and blood, ended up on the streets while Alexander reveled in unimaginable wealth? His gaze fell on a framed photograph on his desk, a younger Michael, his personal assistant, smiling confidently beside Alexander. Michael had been with him for decades, a loyal shadow, meticulously managing every detail of Alexander's life. He was the one who had handled the aftermath of the clinic fire, the one who had relayed his parents' reassurances about Ethan's supposed demise, and the one who had later orchestrated the quiet, private adoption of his son. Michael was the keeper of his secrets, the gatekeeper of his past. The chilling thought began to take root. Michael knew. A cold, calculated fury began to replace Alexander's initial shock. He summoned Michael to his office. The air crackled with a tension that was entirely new between them. Michael, sensing the shift, entered with his usual calm demeanor. But a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. "Michael," Alexander began, his voice dangerously low, each word a hammer blow. "We need to talk about the old clinic, and about Ethan." Michael's composure instantly crumbled, his face paled, and his hands, usually steady, began to tremble. "Sir, I don't know what you mean. That clinic, it was destroyed decades ago. A tragic accident." "Don't lie to me, Michael." Alexander's voice rose, a growl of suppressed rage. "I saw him. Ethan. He's alive. And he's here. In my house. And he has the same scar from the fire. The same scar I remember from the clinic." Michael staggered back, his eyes wide with terror. He knew. He had always known. The weight of his guilt, hidden for so long, finally broke him. He collapsed into a chair, his face a mask of shame and fear. "It wasn't just your parents, Mr. Sterling," Michael stammered, his voice choked. "They paid me handsomely, yes, to ensure your focus remained on your recovery and your inheritance. They wanted no distractions, no loose ends. They believed Ethan died, and they tasked me with ensuring that belief was unshakable." A wave of nausea washed over Alexander. His parents were complicit, yes. But Michael's confession hinted at something far more sinister. "What else, Michael?" Alexander demanded, his voice chillingly calm. "Tell me everything, now." Michael, cornered and broken, confessed to a deeper, more insidious betrayal. I resented you, Mr. Sterling, he whimpered, the words tumbling out in a torrent of self-loathing. Always in your shadow, always the loyal assistant, while you amassed billions. I saw my chance when your parents tasked me with handling Ethan's situation. I knew the boy hadn't died in the fire. He was rescued, barely alive, and transferred to a state-run orphanage. Records deliberately falsified to show him as deceased or untraceable. Alexander listened, his blood running cold. You manipulated the adoption process. Yes, Michael sobbed. I pulled strings. I ensured Ethan was placed in a neglectful foster home, one that wouldn't seek him out, one that wouldn't try to connect him with his past. I fed you false reports about his supposed well-being, about his successful adoption into a loving family, always just out of reach. I wanted you to believe he was safe, loved, so you wouldn't look too closely. I wanted you to live with the guilt of abandonment, while your own son suffered. The revelation twisted Alexander's gut. Michael, his trusted confidant, had deliberately orchestrated his son's suffering, ensuring he grew up in hardship while Alexander remained blissfully ignorant. The depravity of it was unfathomable. And the fire. Michael. Alexander's voice was a low growl. How did it start? Michael flinched, his eyes darting away. That was my doing too. Not initially. But I saw an opportunity. I was secretly funneling funds from the clinic, skimming profits. When word came that there would be an internal audit, I knew I had to destroy the evidence. I set the fire myself, a small one, meant to destroy the records. But it got out of control. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, I swear. I just wanted to destroy the paper trail. The confession was a brutal blow. Michael, his trusted aide, was not just a betrayer. He was an arsonist, a thief, and indirectly, the cause of untold suffering. The web of deception was far more tangled and venomous than Alexander could have ever imagined. His parents had been motivated by protection, however misguided. Michael had been motivated by pure, unadulterated resentment and greed. Alexander felt a cold, crushing weight. He had been so blind, so trusting. He had built his empire on the bedrock of his parents' lies and Michael's cunning. The man he had become, the cold, ruthless billionaire, was a product of this elaborate, cruel deception. He stood up, his voice now devoid of rage, replaced by a chilling clarity. Get out, Michael. Get out of my sight. You will be arrested. Every penny you've stolen, every lie you've told, will be exposed, and you will pay for what you've done. To me, to Ethan, and to David. Michael, reduced to a weeping, pathetic mess, was led away by Alexander's security, his decades of loyalty ending in utter disgrace. Alexander stood alone in his office, the opulent space now feeling like a tomb. His gilded cage had shattered, revealing the raw, ugly truth of his life. He was a father who had unwittingly condemned his own son to a life of hardship, all while living in a lie. The path to redemption, he knew, would be long and arduous, but he was finally ready to walk it. The next step was the hardest of all, confessing everything to Lily and to Ethan, the son he had tragically lost and miraculously found. The air in Alexander Sterling's study was thick with the dust of shattered illusions. Michael's confession, a venomous torrent of greed and resentment, had laid bare a betrayal far more heinous than Alexander could have ever conceived. His parents' misguided protection was one thing. Michael's calculated malice, his deliberate orchestration of Ethan's suffering, was another entirely. Alexander, the man who prided himself on his unwavering control, was left reeling, the architect of his own misery, albeit unknowingly. The weight of a father's sins, inherited and earned, now crushed him. He staggered to his private bar, pouring himself a generous measure of aged whiskey, but the amber liquid offered no comfort. He looked at his reflection in the polished glass, seeing not the powerful billionaire, but a stranger. A man whose life had been built on a monumental lie. A lie that had condemned his own son to a life of hardship. The gilded cage of his existence now felt like a suffocating tomb, its walls etched with the suffering he had unknowingly inflicted. The thought of Ethan, his bright-eyed son, enduring the neglect of a foster home, the harsh realities of the streets, while Alexander lived in opulent ignorance, was a torment worse than any physical pain. He remembered the boy's quiet dignity on the bus, his simple kindness despite his ragged appearance, his unwavering belief in unconventional healing. Ethan, a product of resilience forged in fire, was a stark contrast to the hollow man Alexander had become. He knew what he had to do. The truth, however agonizing, had to be spoken. Not just to Ethan, but to Lily. His beloved Lily, whose hope he had desperately clung to, whose suffering he had tried to alleviate with endless millions, while the miracle she needed was his own flesh and blood. A victim of his past and Michael's treachery, Alexander made his way to Lily's room. The sun, usually a welcome visitor, felt like a harsh spotlight illuminating his shame. Lily was in her wheelchair, a book open on her lap, a faint smile on her face as she looked out at the garden. She was so innocent, so brave. How could he possibly shatter her world with such a dark, convoluted truth? He sat beside her, his voice rough with emotion. "Lily," he began, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "There's something I need to tell you. Something very important. About Ethan." Lily's brow furrowed slightly, sensing the unusual gravity in his tone. "Ethan, is he all right? Dad, did something happen?" Her concern for the beggar boy, despite her own struggles, pierced Alexander's heart. He took a deep breath, the words catching in his throat. "Ethan, he's more than just a healer. Lily, he's your brother." Lily's eyes widened, her smile fading. My brother. But I don't have a brother. Dad." Her voice was soft, laced with confusion. Alexander then launched into the agonizing confession, the full, unvarnished truth. He spoke of his own temporary paralysis as a child, the secret clinic, and the terrifying fire. He described meeting Ethan, the young boy who shared his room, and believing him to have perished in the blaze. He confessed his parents' role in suppressing the truth, their fear of scandal, and their deliberate deception to protect his inheritance and reputation. And then, his voice choked with shame, he revealed Michael's treachery, how his trusted assistant had deliberately manipulated Ethan's adoption, ensuring he ended up in a neglectful foster home, while feeding Alexander false reports of his son's well-being. "I believed them." "Lily," Alexander whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I wanted to believe the lie. It was easier. It absolved me of responsibility. I was a coward. I lived a life of luxury, oblivious to the suffering of my own son, while he grew up in poverty, believing himself an orphan." Lily sat in stunned silence, her face pale. Her hand, which Alexander still held, felt cold and distant. The world she knew, built on the unwavering foundation of her father's strength and integrity, crumbled around her. Her gentle nature, her innate kindness, struggled to comprehend the depths of such a betrayal. "Ethan, my brother," she repeated, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. Her eyes, filled with a complex mix of emotions, looked at her father, then at the empty space beside her, as if trying to conjure the image of this newfound sibling. There was confusion, yes, but also a nascent spark of a feeling she couldn't quite name, a strange connection, a longing for a brother she never knew she had. But then, the pain of the betrayal, the sheer magnitude of the lie, began to set in. You knew about him, and you kept it from me," she asked, her voice trembling. "All these years, you searched for a cure for me, spending millions, while my own brother, who could heal me, was suffering on the streets. Why? Dad, Why? Alexander bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze. My ambition, Lily, my pride, my fear of scandal, my blindness. I wanted to protect my legacy, and I allowed myself to be manipulated into believing a convenient lie. I was a fool. The truth, raw and brutal, hung in the air between them. Lily, the brave girl who had faced her own physical struggles with remarkable grace, now faced an emotional wound far deeper. The revelation had indeed shaken their world to its core. Alexander, the man who had meticulously controlled every aspect of his life, had finally allowed the truth to explode, exposing the painful legacy of his choices and the devastating weight of a father's sins. The healing process for Lily, and for their broken family, would be a long, arduous journey. But for the first time in his life, Alexander felt a desperate, agonizing hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a path to forgiveness and a new kind of redemption. The revelation of Ethan's true identity and Michael's treacherous conspiracy sent shockwaves through Alexander Sterling's fractured family. Lily, initially reeling from the betrayal, slowly began to process the monumental truth. The boy who had offered a glimmer of hope was not just a healer. He was her long-lost brother, a victim of the same ambition and deception that had shaped her own life. Alexander, shattered but resolute, wasted no time. He immediately deployed his legal team, armed with Michael's confession and the overwhelming evidence he had compiled. Michael, confronted with the irrefutable proof of his decades-long deception, his embezzlement, and his culpability in the clinic fire, crumbled. He was arrested, his once impeccable reputation utterly destroyed, and the intricate web of his deceit began to unravel in full public view. The sheer audacity of his betrayal shocked the city, but the public's focus quickly shifted to the incredible story of Lily and Ethan. With Michael exposed, Alexander's attention turned entirely to Ethan. He approached his son with a humility he hadn't known he possessed. "Ethan," he began, his voice raw with regret, "I am so deeply sorry. For everything. For the years you suffered. For the truth that was stolen from us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." Ethan, though his face hardened by years of hardship, possessed an extraordinary capacity for empathy. He listened, not with the bitterness Alexander expected, but with a quiet intensity. He saw the genuine agony in his father's eyes, the crushing weight of remorse. The story of Michael's betrayal, his deliberate manipulation, resonated with Ethan's own experiences of navigating a harsh, deceptive world. "It wasn't just your doing, was it?" Ethan finally said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Your parents, and then Michael. A lot of people built their lives on that lie." There was no accusation in his tone, only a profound understanding of the complex layers of their tragedy. Then, Ethan revealed a truth that would change everything, a secret he had guarded since the fire. "My healing abilities," he began, his gaze piercing. "They aren't just herbs and touch. It's something more. It's a rare genetic trait, passed down through families. I can sense and, to a degree, manipulate bioelectric fields within the body." Alexander stared at him, stunned. He remembered vague discussions from the old clinic, esoteric theories about energy fields and cellular regeneration. Could it be? "It's from your side of the family, father." Ethan confirmed, a faint, ironic smile touching his lips. "It's what the experimental clinic was trying to understand, trying to cultivate. It's why I was there. They believed they could harness it for their own purposes. But they only ever scratched the surface." He went on to explain how the fire, ironically, had intensified his abilities, forcing him to rely on his intuition and sharpen his senses to survive on the streets. He had learned to read the subtle energies of living things, developing a unique form of intuitive healing that defied conventional science. The revelation was a scientific bombshell, providing a rational, albeit extraordinary, explanation for Ethan's previously inexplicable talents. It also added another layer of irony to Alexander's life. The very genetic trait he desperately sought a cure for in his daughter, the missing piece of his own family's medical puzzle, had been present in his abandoned son all along. With this newfound understanding, and with Lily's condition worsening, Ethan dedicated himself fully to her healing. It was a race against time, a final, desperate attempt. He combined his unique ability to sense and influence Lily's bioelectric fields with a crucial, final herbal concoction he had meticulously prepared from rare wild plants he knew from his years on the streets. He worked tirelessly, day and night, his focus absolute, his connection to his sister palpable. Alexander and Maria watched, mesmerized, as Ethan performed his unconventional treatments. They saw the subtle shifts in Lily's body, the way her muscles twitched, the faint color returning to her limbs. The medical specialists, initially skeptical, were baffled by the physiological changes they observed, unable to explain them through conventional means. Then came the moment. It was a quiet afternoon. Ethan had finished a long session, his own body visibly drained. Lily lay resting, a serene expression on her face. Suddenly, her eyes fluttered open. She looked at Ethan, then at Alexander, a determined glint in her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, her voice surprisingly strong. "Ethan," with a supreme effort, and with Ethan's guiding touch on her spine. Lily slowly, agonizingly, began to move her legs. A tremor ran through her body, but then, with a surge of raw, unyielding will, she pushed herself up. Her legs, crippled for so long, straightened. She took a hesitant breath, and then, with a triumphant gasp, she stood. She swayed, her muscles trembling, but she was standing. Then, with tears streaming down her face, she took a single, unsteady step. Then another, and another. She wasn't walking perfectly, but she was walking. The true healing had begun. Alexander watched, tears blurring his vision, his heart overflowing with a mixture of disbelief, relief, and an overwhelming surge of paternal love. He had spent millions, scoured the globe, battled despair, and here, in his own home, his long-lost son, a boy he had abandoned, had performed the miracle he had always dreamed of. Lily, his precious daughter, was walking. The weight of his sins, the years of silence and regret, finally began to lift, replaced by the profound, undeniable truth of a brother's love and a family's miraculous reunion. The journey towards a new legacy, forged in fire and bound by forgiveness, had truly begun. The miracle of Lily taking her first steps resonated far beyond the confines of Alexander Sterling's mansion. It was a moment of profound transformation, not just for Lily, but for the entire family. The sheer, unadulterated joy in Alexander's eyes as he watched his daughter walk, juxtaposed with the quiet pride on Ethan's face, painted a picture of hope that transcended years of pain and betrayal. The legal repercussions for Michael were swift and severe. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including Alexander's powerful testimony and Ethan's compelling, detailed account of his manipulation, Michael was convicted of fraud, embezzlement, and a litany of other charges. He faced a lengthy prison sentence, his reputation utterly destroyed. His ill-gotten gains were seized, much of them redirected towards the new foundations Alexander established. Alexander, now a man stripped bare of his arrogance and pride, embarked on a profound journey of self-reflection and redemption. His focus shifted entirely from accumulating wealth to rectifying the wrongs of his past. He publicly confessed his part in the decades-long deception, admitting his own cowardice and blindness. While the media frenzy was intense, his raw honesty and visible remorse resonated with the public, earning him a grudging respect that transcended his former reputation as a ruthless billionaire. He dedicated his vast fortune to ethical medical research, particularly in the fields of rare genetic disorders and spinal conditions. He established the Lily and Ethan Sterling Foundation for Healing and Hope, a sprawling philanthropic endeavor aimed at providing free, cutting-edge medical care to children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and funding research into unconventional healing methods. It was a direct atonement for his past, ensuring that no other child would suffer the way Ethan had, or face the limitations Lily had, due to a lack of resources. The journey to build a new father-son relationship between Alexander and Ethan was a difficult one, fraught with unspoken resentments and the echoes of lost time. Ethan, though deeply hurt by his father's abandonment, possessed an extraordinary capacity for empathy. He saw Alexander's genuine efforts, his humility, and his unwavering commitment to making amends. They spent countless hours talking, sharing their stories, bridging the chasm of two vastly different lives. Alexander learned of Ethan's struggles, his resilience, his quiet wisdom gleaned from the streets. Ethan, in turn, began to see his father not just as the powerful, distant figure, but as a man scarred by his own past, desperately seeking to heal. Slowly, painstakingly, a new bond began to form, a profound connection built not on blood alone, but on mutual respect and shared healing. Lily, fully recovering with Ethan's continued guidance and the best medical care, became a symbol of hope. Her vibrant spirit, once dimmed by her condition, now shone brighter than ever. She immersed herself in advocacy for children with disabilities, using her voice to inspire and uplift others. Her relationship with Ethan blossomed into an unbreakable bond of sibling love, a testament to the unexpected miracles life could bring. The Sterling Mansion, once a cold monument to solitary wealth, transformed into a vibrant home filled with laughter, music, and the quiet hum of healing. Ethan, no longer the beggar boy, found his place within the family, continuing his studies in a specialized medical program focused on bioenergetic healing, a field Alexander passionately funded. He continued to work with Lily, refining his techniques, and together they explored new avenues for treating rare conditions. The family, now whole in a way Alexander had never thought possible, celebrated holidays together, shared meals, and created new memories to slowly outweigh the painful ones. Alexander, once obsessed with leaving a material legacy, now understood that his true legacy was the love and reconciliation within his family, the lives he was now actively saving, and the hope he was instilling in others. The story of the Sterling family, of the millionaire, the beggar boy, and the crippled daughter, became a powerful narrative of resilience, forgiveness, and the triumph of the human spirit. It was a poignant reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that true wealth lies not in material possessions but in the embrace of a unified heart, and that even the deepest wounds can heal when confronted with truth, love, and a genuine desire for redemption. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one, and while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below.